A northern world of ice and iron. To understand the Vikings, we must begin not with their ships or their raids, but with the land that shaped them long before they ever pushed a prow into salt water. Scandinavia in the late 8th century was a world of hard edges and deep quiet. Norway's mountains and fjords rising like weathered stone teeth from the sea. Sweden's lakes glinting between endless forests. Denmark's gentler fields rolling under restless northern skies. It was a landscape still wearing the scars of the Ice Age, marked by erratics, carved valleys, and thin, cold soil. This northern world was never generous. The climate hovered within what scientists call the medieval warm period, though warm is a relative term here. Summers were only slightly longer, winters only slightly less brutal. Yet those small climatic gifts made the difference between survival and starvation. Tree rings taken from ancient pines in Norway show decades where growth surged, suggesting that these mild intervals expanded the growing season just enough to support more livestock, more grain, and, crucially, more people willing to take risks beyond their shores. Walk into a Viking longhouse, reconstructed through soil chemistry and excavation from Borg and Järrestad. You find a building thick with smoke, the beams blackened from centuries of hearth fires, the floor layered with straw, ash, bone fragments, and the trampled debris of daily life. Humans and animals shared the same interior during winter. Cows and sheep slept behind wooden partitions, their warmth radiating into the living space. Children slept on benches lined with woolen blankets, parents nearby, elders closest to the fire. Light came from flickering tallow candles or oil lamps made from carved stone. Everything smelled of wood smoke, cooked barley, wet wool, and earth. Days were measured not by clocks, but by the work of the hand. Milking, weaving, gathering peat, repairing tools, churning butter, harvesting hay, smoking fish. Recent DNA research has dramatically reshaped the image of the Viking world. There was no single Viking race, no homogeneous northern bloodline. Ancient genomes extracted from bones across Europe reveal a genetic tapestry woven from centuries of interaction with Celtic, Baltic, Finnic, and Slavic peoples. Some of the individuals buried with swords and shields in England or France were not Scandinavian at all, and some who lived and died in Scandinavia never sailed farther than a nearby fjord. Mobility and identity did not always align. The Viking Age, we now know, was as much a story of cultural blending and exchange as it was of conquest. This was the world from which the Vikings emerged, a world that demanded resilience, fostered ingenuity, and taught its people to read the seasons with the same precision they would one day apply to the open sea. Society and the architecture of order. Contrary to the romantic image of wild, chaotic raiders, Viking society was orderly, structured, and deeply legalistic. The true backbone of this world was not the sword, but the æt. The extended family kinship governed everything. Your rights, your obligations, your alliances, even the weight of your reputation. Archaeological studies of graves across Scandinavia show clusters of related individuals buried together across generations. These were not isolated homesteads clinging to the edge of survival, but networks of families linked by shared ancestry and mutual obligation. Disputes were not settled by the strong overwhelming the weak. They were brought to the Thing, the open-air assembly that functioned as a parliament, court, and community gathering all at once. Here, under the open sky, laws were spoken aloud by the law speaker, an office built on memory and authority. Witnesses came forward to recite oaths, and agreements were confirmed publicly. Compensation, not execution, was the default outcome for most crimes. This was a society that valued balance over bloodshed. The thing was, in many ways, a northern democracy. Imperfect, stratified, and yet astonishingly advanced for the early medieval world. Women held a central role in both household and legal life. A woman could divorce a husband who mistreated her, reclaim her dowry, and manage a farm in his absence. Keys, found in graves across Scandinavia, symbolized their command over resources and property. Some women traveled, traded, and even fought. The famous warrior buried at Birka, once assumed to be male, was revealed by DNA testing to be female, altering long-held assumptions about gender and power in Norse culture. But society was not equal. At the top stood jarls, regional elites whose power often mirrored chieftains or small kings. Most people were carls, free farmers who formed the backbone of the population, and beneath them were thralls, enslaved individuals captured in raids or born into bondage. Excavations in Hedeby, Dublin, and the Russian river routes leave no doubt. Slavery was an economic engine of the Viking Age, deeply embedded in the fabric of everyday life. Language reveals just how far this society reached. Old Norse was not a single tongue, but a family of dialects spoken across a vast geography. Its influence can still be heard in modern English, in words like sky, window, husband, law, take, and anger. Language is a fossilized form of contact, and the linguistic imprint of Old Norse shows how profoundly the Vikings reshaped the cultures they encountered. This was a world governed not by chaos, but by a fragile yet remarkably sophisticated web of customs, kinship, and law. If Scandinavia's land shaped the people, the sea shaped their destiny. The Viking Age was not built on brute strength, but on technology, on the soft creak of planks bending with the waves, on the precision of a sail woven over years, on the deep knowledge of wind and water that only generations of coastal living could produce. The Viking longship was an engineering marvel. Digs at Oseberg and Gokstad reveal hulls built with overlapping oak planks, each one shaped with astonishing uniformity, fastened by iron rivets, and flexibly braced by ribs designed to move with the sea rather than resist it. These ships were light, fast, and resilient. Their shallow drafts allowed them to slip through river mouths, skim over sandbars, and glide up estuaries where no army expected them. Navigation was not guesswork. Norse sailors read the world like a living map. They used birds, watching their flight patterns to determine the direction of land. They studied the color of the sea, the smell of the water, the behavior of whales. Recent experiments with Iceland's spar crystals support the old stories of sunstones, a way to detect the hidden position of the sun through clouds by reading polarized light. Such tools would have allowed Viking navigators to maintain direction even in overcast northern seas. Pieces of carved wooden dials found in Greenland hint at crude but effective solar compasses, which may have been carried aboard ships heading west toward Iceland and beyond. Behind each voyage stood a web of industry. The textile economy, largely managed by women, produced woolen sails that were masterpieces of craft and engineering. Isotope analysis of fibers from Haithabu suggests that the wool for a single sail might come from sheep grazing in multiple regions, pointing to coordinated production and vast labor networks. A full sail might take several years of spinning, weaving, and fulling. Nothing about Viking technology was accidental. It was the patient accumulation of knowledge passed hand to hand, loom to loom. Weapons and tools were equally refined. Ironworking required enormous energy. Charcoal had to be produced from carefully managed forests, smelted in bloomery furnaces, and forged by experienced smiths who understood how to pattern weld blades for both beauty and strength. Their axes, spears, chisels, nails, and ship rivets were not crude artifacts, but the products of a complex metallurgical tradition. The Viking Age was not defined simply by war, but by the science of the practical, by shipwrights shaping keels, by navigators reading the horizon, by weavers creating the sails that caught the world's winds. Most Vikings were farmers long before they were sailors, and their lives were governed by the steady rhythm of work. Fields of barley and rye were sown in spring and harvested in early autumn, while oats fed both humans and livestock. Turnips, cabbages, leeks, peas, beans, and apples filled out the seasonal diet. Archaeobotanical remains, charred grains, pollen traces, and plant silica recovered from hearths reveal a consistent agricultural system across Scandinavia. Livestock shaped daily life. Sheep, kept as much for their wool as their meat, grazed on open hillsides and coastal meadows. Cattle provided milk, dung, traction for plows, and eventually meat for the winter horses were small but sturdy, well adapted to steep terrain. Pigs rooted in the underbrush, turning forest edges into natural farms. Their bones, recovered from refuse pits, show animals smaller and leaner than modern breeds, products of a harsher, less engineered world. Fish sustained entire settlements. Coastal middens contain overwhelming quantities of dried cod, herring, and salmon bones. Northern communities mastered the art of stockfish, air-dried cod that kept for months and could be traded across vast distances. Inland communities preserved trout and char by smoking them over alder and birch. Health was fragile. Skeletal remains show arthritis from heavy labor, dental wear from stone-ground flour, and signs of periodic famine when crops failed. Yet many individuals reached their 50s or 60s, suggesting that while life was hard, it was not uniformly short. Medical care blended practical remedies, herbs for infection, cauterization for wounds, with ritual practices rooted in belief and tradition. Textiles were one of the most demanding industries in Viking life. Women spun wool into thread, wove cloth on upright looms, dyed it with plant pigments, and folded it into thick, weather-tight fabric. The work was constant. Winter evenings were filled with the steady rhythm of weaving. Without this labor, ships could not sail, families could not stay warm, and trade could not flourish. The Viking world survived not through plunder, but through discipline, through the slow, relentless work of farming, fishing, crafting, building, and weaving. Everything that kept a northern community alive against the cold. To understand the Viking soul, you must enter a world where myth and reality interwove seamlessly. Norse religion was not confined to temples or scriptures. It lived in the landscape, in family memory, in the rhythm of work, and the uncertainty of survival. The gods were never distant. Odin's presence lived in the ravens that circled above a field. Thor's protection rang in the thunder rolling across a fjord. Freyr and Freya breathed through the harvest and the hearth. Archaeological sites across Scandinavia reveal layers of devotion. In bogs, offerings of weapons, tools, and animal remains were deposited with deliberate care, often broken to release their spirit. At ceremonial centers like Gamla Uppsala, feasting halls stood near burial mounds and ritual spaces where kings blended political authority with sacred obligation. Amulets shaped like Thor's hammer, small figurines of gods or Valkyries, and carved wooden idols appear across settlements large and small, suggesting a faith both intimate and communal. Death reflected these beliefs. In earlier centuries, cremation sent the spirit skyward, the ashes buried in mounds with goods to accompany the soul. Later, inhumation graves filled with weapons, tools, jewelry, and animals signaled a different vision of the afterlife. Ship burials, rare, majestic, reserved for the highest status, symbolized a journey into the beyond. Stable isotope analysis reveals that many people buried in Norway or Sweden weren't local. They had traveled or migrated, carrying their beliefs with them across the seas. But the world was changing. Christianity entered Scandinavia slowly, first through trade routes, then through alliances, then through the ambitions of kings who saw in the new faith a path to unity and power. Over generations, burial customs shifted. Crosses appeared alongside hammers, laws changed. Literacy entered the north. The sagas, written down centuries later in Iceland, preserved fragments of an older world, even as the new one overtook it. Climate shifts, political centralization, stronger defenses in Europe, and changing trade routes eventually dimmed the fire of the Viking Age. By the 12th century, the world that had launched longships across oceans had transformed into the medieval kingdoms of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Cultures still shaped by their northern roots, but no longer defined by raiding, exploration, and expansion. The Viking Age ended not with collapse, but with evolution. Its people carried forward their skills, their stories, and their deep connection to the land and sea, and in the quiet places of Scandinavia, in the sagas, in the carved wood of stave churches, in the fields where longhouses once stood, the echoes of that earlier world remain.